Hey everyone, it's Chris, and I'm here to present to you my very first anime review for my channel. It's a 90s classic anime that many people love to this day and grew up with. Magical Girl Classic Sailor Moon. I'm going to be reviewing the first season here, basically telling you what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. I have so much love and nostalgia for this show that I'm going to try and be as objective as possible. I know a lot of people love this series, so I'm just gonna, tell you a little bit about what I liked, what I didn't like. Does it hold up well still today? Let's get on with it then. One thing I liked about this show was just the sense of friendship that, the characters have amongst themselves. Sailor Moon, Sailor Mercury, and Sailor Mars, especially in the beginning, I felt like the development of those three characters and the personalities played well off of each other. Like Usagi and Rei, they don't really get along. Sailor Moon and Sailor Mars, they're kind of like there's kind of like a rivalry between the two of them. They're always fighting off and on here and there, but it's more like a way it's they're never downright mean to each other. There's just like a playfulness to it, kind of like like a sibling thing that you might encounter. And Sailor Mercury kind of, in the middle, trying to keep both of them from each other's throats and things like that. Um, I felt like the animation itself, I love older animation personally, and I felt like the animation, despite there being shortcuts in it, actually holds up pretty well still. I enjoyed the animation for the most part. Even the transformation sequences, there's so many of them. I felt like they were all animated really well and still hold up pretty well to this day. The story progression I really like too because Sailor Moon in the first season essentially, you know, it's kind of arc based. So in the first arc, I think the first 7 or 8 episodes, Usagi, aka Sailor Moon, is basically by herself. She hasn't encountered any of the other Sailor Guardians. It's basically, they go through. There's four villains from the Dark Kingdom known as the Four Heavenly Kings. There's Jadeite, Nephrite, Zoisite, and Kunzite. And, they go through these different arcs where they encounter one of these four generals, and once the general is defeated, they move on to the next one, but there's varying degrees to that. So the varying degrees to their various plots that they use to try and gather energy to resurrect their evil ruler. So Jadeite, for example, he gathers energy from large groups of people and is the first villain that they encounter. And during his tenure, Sailor Moon is awakened, Sailor Mars is awakened, and Sailor Mercury is awakened prior to Sailor Mars. But so all three of them are awakened, and he really doesn't stand a chance. He like loses at every turn. His arc is about 13 episodes long. Um, so his arc involves, basically the awakening of the Sailor Senshi. Um, just you get a feel for their everyday lives. Usagi, Rei, Ami, just how they interact with each other, and eventually, he's defeated. So his power to gather energy to help awaken the evil ruler is, his plot in the story is on. He the female characters, like the Senshi themselves, have a lot of like good development in this arc, just getting to know each other and like figuring out their powers and things like that. Jadeite himself isn't the best of the villains. I'll get to that in a second, but the next arc introduces Nephrite, who is more concerned with targeting a single individual and maximizing the energy from them, usually through like an item that is important to the person that he's targeting, like a camera or a tennis racket, and then that item, you know, takes the energy from these people and turns into a monster that the girls have to defeat. So they try to actually humanize his character a lot by developing a relationship between Naru, Usagi's best friend. Um, it worked really well. I thought they gave him a civilian identity and they tried to um, just humanize him. He had a relationship with her. He didn't know if he was in love with her. He finally figures out he's in love with her, and then he's killed off by one of the other generals, and then their story arc starts. So the story progression I thought went really well. And then in the third arc, we have Zoisite. We get introduced to Sailor Jupiter, Sailor Venus, the two remaining members of the Inner Senshi. Um, During those parts, I liked the third arc with Zoisite because Zoisite is probably the second best villain. He's just really evil, really evil and gay, and just the comedic aspects he finds himself in, and just the action. He's really like tricky and sneaky, and like the comedy and like the romance actually he finds himself in with Kunzite. So I thought he was the second best villain behind Nephrite. The third arc basically involves these monsters known as the Seven Great Yoma, the Seven Great Monsters. They've been reincarnated from the Moon Kingdom as humans, and each one of them possesses a rainbow crystal. Um, the rainbow crystal, they essentially need 7 of them to resurrect the legendary silver crystal that, is a big plot point. So once the crystals are moved from these particular people with like seemingly weird abilities and different strengths that they have, they turn into a monster, and then Sailor Moon has to purify them and turn them back to normal. And then there's this war for the rainbow crystals. Tuxedo Mask definitely was a great. I felt like in the beginning, Tuxedo Mask doesn't know that he's Tuxedo Mask. Mamoru does not know that he's Tuxedo Mask. So them finding out, or him finding out, like, who he is and what his connection to all this is, and the rainbow crystals kind of like him fighting against Zoisite for them. And eventually, Usagi revealing her identity to him revealing her identity to her. They find out about their past lives on the Moon Kingdom, that whole backstory. I loved that, they all had these past lives. There was that connection to the Dark Kingdom that they attacked the Moon Kingdom. They were all reincarnated on Earth. The entire backstory of this series is actually really good, despite some of the shortcomings in some of the individual episodic stories. Sailor Moon, it's a Monster of the Week series. I think this might be the series where the term was originally invented. She fights a lot of monsters. One per episode normally, but I will say this about that, the monsters themselves, the designs are actually really well done, and there's enough variety in them, even though the monsters themselves might not last long. But I thought there was a lot of like creativity in the monster designs and things like that, so that was a plus for me. Um, the music itself, I love the opening thing, Miracle Romance. I can sing along to it in Japanese, but I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not going to embarrass myself too badly. The opening and ending themes, I feel like for Sailor Moon are the standouts. There are some decent enough background music. A lot of the time, the background music, it's just standard fare. Like I said, there's a few standout pieces here and there, but to me, the real kicker for the music is the opening theme. I love the opening theme. When they change the animation for it, even I love it. I sing along every time. It's good stuff. Um, the characters themselves, like I loved Usagi and Ami and Rei in the beginning, and how they played off how their personalities played off one another. When Sailor Jupiter was introduced, like, I wasn't sure how she would fit into the group dynamic, but I like that they showed how, she and Usagi kind of developed this friendship. Mako, Sailor Jupiter, she gets transferred into Usagi's school, and they kind of, they form a friendship. They show them getting along. They show how Sailor Jupiter is, like, she's heartbroken. She's had her heart broken a lot. A reoccurring, like, gag throughout the series is that most time if she sees a guy, she's like, "Oh, he reminds me of my ex-boyfriend. He broke my heart." And it's like it can be any guy for any various reason, and she just always says this, and then you find out later, she's a great cook, and she's just kind of like she's like the tough girl tomboy, but she's also kind of like the mom of the group. I don't know. She's really fierce in combat, and she's probably the most like physically strong of the girls. And I liked her introduction. Now, most people who watch earlier on, there's the characters are obsessed with Sailor V, like the Sailor V video game, and there's I think a manga series that features Sailor V. Um, you don't have to be too smart to put two and two together that Sailor V is Sailor Venus. With Sailor Venus's introduction, these are some of the things I didn't like. I felt like they didn't like her develop her personality enough to make her stand out amongst the four Senshi that we've known and loved for a really while. I don't think Sailor Venus makes an appearance until like episode 34 or 35 or something like that, like physically as Sailor Venus. Um like, Usagi's the crybaby, she's the clumsy one, she's got the heart. She's the main character. I found her very endearing and funny and like, heartwarming. And Ami, she's the smart one. She's kind of like the most logical headed one. She kind of keeps the girls together when they fight and stuff like that. Mako, she's the tough tomboy who likes to cook, and Rei's the hot headed one that starts the fight. She's a little angry, little she's the she's the Raphael of the group, if you will. So um when Sailor Venus was introduced, I didn't feel like they gave her enough defining characteristics. I think there's something like she wants to be like an idol. They I will say that they tried to handle her a little bit differently. Like they did show that like she was actually the first Sailor Senshi to be awakened. Not fully realizing her full identity until she meets the other girls and comes back to Japan and everything. One thing I liked was that they gave her like this backstory that we didn't get the first time when Deke dubbed and released the series. They show her life in England, how she became Sailor V. Um, this tragic backstory involving a woman from her past and uh, a guy she was in love with, and like what actually happened to Sailor V, how she came back to Japan and then realized she fully awakened as Sailor Venus. Um, I wish we got this episode like way back when, because it would have added more to her character. I feel like I'm not hating on Sailor Venus. I really do like Sailor Venus, and then it's just when she was first introduced, the first couple episodes, like a lot went down. Like they Sailor Moon revealed her true identity to Tuxedo Mask. They found out more so about their past lives and things like that, and she didn't really get a chance to like have more of a spotlight until like 8 episodes later where they reveal her past. And then they did try to establish a connection between her and Sailor Moon about like there's that bad haircut episode or whatever. The two of them try to form a camaraderie, and she is very similar to Sailor Moon. She can be late a lot. She has like she's the other one with the cat guardian. She's a bit more mature than Sailor Moon, but she also has this whole like silliness about her that I don't feel like they kind of developed as much until like later on in the series. So that was one thing I didn't like, was just like Sailor Venus's introduction was a little rough. She didn't have any like defining characteristics enough as the other girls in the beginning, but they fixed that out over time. And then another thing about Sailor Moon is that there is a lot of recycled animation, which is one thing I didn't like. Like the attacks that they use, they're gonna use the same attack every episode. Another thing, the transformation sequences. I'm in the thought, of the party that when they show the transformation sequences, they're just showing them for the audience. Like the transformation sequences, in my like when they're actually in the moment in the series, they don't actually take that long. Like it's like a 10-second thing. Otherwise, like whilst they're transforming, someone could easily attack and kill them. My whole thing is like they're showing this to us just to show us what it looks like. They're obviously doing this whole spread out thing to like take up some time and some minutes and things like that for the runtime of the episode. But like there are a lot of transformation sequences, and it can get a little wearing, and just come on already, like get to the fight and everything. It's gonna last like a couple minutes anyway. But I thought I'm used to them. I love Sailor Moon, so um I wasn't too bothered by those. But there's a lot of that recycled stuff, like the attacks and transformations and stuff. But they do switch it up. Like sometimes they'll have the characters combine attacks, or they'll skip out on the transformation sequences here and there. So um, so I feel like Sailor Moon for me personally, it's held up actually pretty well. It doesn't have the deepest of storylines. The individual episode stories that are presented, most of them are actually pretty enjoyable. The progression of the plot arcs and then just the way that the characters play off one another actually works really well. There's a romance aspect to it, and I didn't feel like it got too heavy-handed or like, over the top. There are a little bit of like, cheesy moments here and there with the romance aspects, but I thought it was handled really well, especially between Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask having to deal with like, their current civilian identities, their past lives, and how once they reveal their identities to each other at that particular point in the anime, Tuxedo Mask is abducted and brainwashed by the Dark Kingdom. So, once essentially they find each other, they're taken apart again. So and then they eventually, there's the big climactic fight at the end, and I felt like it was really well done, the romance aspects of the series, as well as the playing off of the girls' personalities and their various, developments, like Usagi and being Sailor Moon, her responsibility with that, finding out who she is in her previous life, her relationship with Mamoru, Tuxedo Mask, um, Ray with her, hot-headedness, her eventually realizing that she can't be with Tuxedo Mask because, he's destined to be with Sailor Moon. Um, Her own kind of like little relationship thing that maybe might be happening in the background. Ami, learning to come out of her shell more, being a bit more aggressive, even some romance for her. So the character personalities play really well off of each other. The only like downside I will say about the DVD presentation is on the first set. I mentioned this in my pickups video. Like the video is so like condensed, as opposed to like full screen, which the remainder of the sets are. Like it's really annoying. It doesn't completely hinder my enjoyment of the series, but that was just a negative thing that I found about the DVDs. I didn't really like that. The voice acting is really solid for the Japanese portion of the series, and that's another thing I wanted to comment on. I love this show originally with the English dub from Deke. So coming back to the series in Japanese, although I have seen a little bit of it in Japanese before, it took a little bit of getting used to, but to me now the Japanese voices are these characters' voices. I did sample the dub like I had mentioned in my pickups video. It's not bad, it's pretty good, it's just not what I'm used to. So if you're on the fence about whether or not to try the series out and you're a dub watcher, go ahead and watch the dub because it is actually fairly serviceable and actually pretty good. So I recommend that. When it comes down to it, like objectively, Sailor Moon with all the negativity and or negative points that I brought up and all the positives I brought up, if it does deserve the praise it gets, despite some of the shortcomings with the animation and not the deepest storyline. Objectively, I'd probably rate Sailor Moon at like a 7.5. But like in my personal opinion, I'd rate this a 10 out of a 10. If you're into shoujo stuff, magical girl stuff, you like romance, you like, the thought of like, past life romance and just stuff in the here and now with the, fighting of the Dark Kingdom and all that sort of deal. I definitely would recommend Sailor Moon if you haven't watched it already. This release from Viz makes the series a lot more accessible. You can get it uncut, unedited, which we didn't get the first time. There's a lot of episodes we didn't get the first time that we're actually, now getting. So, like, the episode about Sailor Venus's past is the real standout for me that we didn't get the first time. It really added more light to her character, and it, made me appreciate her character a little bit more. So I definitely recommend this series if you haven't watched it already. Give it a chance. I know it is older, but if you like older animation and you just haven't checked it out for whatever reason, I'd say do yourself a favor, pick up the releases. They can be found pretty cheaply, and give Sailor Moon a chance. You can, fight evil by moonlight. I don't know. So yeah, definitely give Sailor Moon a chance, and I objectively rate this a 7.5, but realistically, in my personal enjoyment of the series, loved a lot of it, loved most of it. I rate this a 10 out of 10. Thanks, guys. That was my first review, so let me know what you, like or think about in the comments. Let me know what's, your favorite season of Sailor Moon is. Let me know who your favorite character is. Any thoughts, feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you.